Okay, again, trying to do this on multiple places and hopefully this goes okay. I know sometimes it's cutting off things here and there, my eyes aren't tracking, but just gonna have to make the best of it. I am excited to bring you this third principle of intuitive eating. These principles, if you notice, they definitely build on each other, and you're gonna have to circle back and continue to look at the earlier principles. Like I said last week, it's not like, okay, I now know how to honor my hunger. I don't need to think about it anymore. It's definitely something that you'll have to continue to revisit and cycle around. It takes time. This is not a fast process. If you think about how long you might have been restricting food or trying to control it in some way, or even just tracking your food, anything that you've done that has been outside of just paying attention to your own internal cues, if you think about how long you've been doing that, don't be surprised if it takes a while to get out of that and to really pay attention to yourself and pay attention to your own internal awareness. So have patience with this whole process. So, like I mentioned, this is principle 3, and the title of it is essentially to make peace with food. So when you actually literally look up that definition, to make peace with, that term, and it literally means to reestablish friendly relations or to become reconciled with. And I love that concept, that is what we're looking for. If you think about it in terms of your food or your body, a lot of times when I work with clients, I hear them say that their body is their enemy or that food is their enemy. How fantastic to think, no, I'm going to reestablish friendly relations with myself, with my body, with food. And that's huge. So frankly, that's a huge reason why I coach. That's what the transformation that I help my clients discover for themselves, is that they can work towards that. They can work towards reestablishing friendly relations with their food and with their bodies, and really become reconciled with food and their body. And let me be clear, in case I haven't said this before, I don't coach that the path to that is through changing your body. It's not. It's through doing the work to change your mindset and your thoughts about your body, and that you can heal your relationship with food and your body without actually even changing anything about it, how it might appear. So that's not what I focus on again. So I would love for today for you to be able to draw a line in the sand for yourself and say, okay, I'm going to call a truce. I'm going to stop the war or the battle with food. I want to be at peace with it. So again, go at your own pace with this. You might think, I can't do that with all foods. This sounds frightening. This sounds scary, but I'm speaking in general terms. So take that into account as you hear me talk today. Choose one particular food. Go one food group at a time. Go as slow as you need. This, again, it is a process, and I'll talk through some of the steps. So hopefully it won't seem as overwhelming. I mentioned before, often I hear a lot of clients and people that I work with complain, I can't control myself around blank, Doritos, candy, baked goods, sugar, carbs. I mean, there's anything that you can put in there. If I get access to one, I'm going to eat the entire bag or the amount, just whatever the amount is. So when I ask clients to challenge that thinking, to get a little bit more curious, really what it boils down to is they're giving me concrete examples of overeating and binging, or just eating to the point of being uncomfortably full on what they consider these bad foods. And the constant in this story or this narrative that they've given me is always that there's deprivation or restriction that began this whole cycle. So this particular food that they're talking about, they don't allow it freely. It's limited. It's restricted in some way. Maybe it's only limited to cheat days. So there's some kind of restriction involved. So we're going to talk about that in more detail, but I want to take a quick science break because I want to reference an older study, but it really is foundational when it comes to our understanding of what happens to our bodies physiologically, biologically, when there are periods of starvation or deprivation or restriction. This is called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, and it's referenced a lot when we talk about intuitive eating because it really sheds light on what happens to your body and your mind when you're going through some sort of food restriction or weight loss process. And it's really striking because when you look at the people that were part of this study, it's very similar to what happens when people are either in an eating disorder or just have some type of disordered eating or just going through a significant weight loss. So the starvation study was done right after World War II by a scientist named Ansel Keys. And he launched this experiment in his quest to better understand the impact of starvation on the body and mind. So he was able to select 36 young male volunteers who were deemed, physically fit, very mentally sound, robust, however he decided. I don't know all the specific criteria they had to meet, but they had to be capable of tolerating a demanding research protocol. So after a 12-week control period, these men where they were allowed to eat varied diet up to like 3,200 calories a day. This was the period before. So it was 12 weeks. They were given this kind of unlimited eating. You're allowed to eat as much as you want. And then after those 12 weeks, Keys then reduced their calories in half for the starvation phase. Now, if you think about, if you're averaging 3,200 calories a day, half is really still, what was that? I should do the math here. Was that 1,600 calories a day? Which honestly, if you look at some of the diet protocols that a lot of famous people who are, popular protocols, 1,600 calories is considered somewhat normal on some of these things. So it wasn't really a starvation, but it definitely was restricted. It was half of what they were doing before. So the impact of their weight loss and limited food availability was really profound in a couple of key areas. So some of the studies noted that the volunteers began to revolve their days around their meal times. They dreamed about food. They fantasized about high calorie, high fat foods. They spent most of their time talking about food, recipes, growing things. Now, this is not Food Network days where they could have easy access to recipes. They were just talking about them. And they also became really agitated if the timing of the meal schedules were delayed or changed at all. And they reported just having pleasure watching someone else eat the food or smelling the food. Then they also reported a lot of urges to overeat. They didn't want the eating to end, but we should note that their food was basically cafeteria food, basically tasteless, but it was enjoyable for them because that's what they had access to. And they were in this period of heavy restriction, starvation, but they were given unlimited access to coffee and chewing gum. And so some of these men chewed and drank constantly, up to 46 a gum a day, and 80 plus ounces of coffee each day. So, and then also any opportunity to gain access to food, they meant that these men would start to binge eat and consume thousands of calories in one sitting. The effects on their mood were also very interesting. The energy of the group shifted quickly once they got into the starvation mode. During that first early 12-week period, they'd been a really lively group. Now they were angry. They debated politics, current events. They were very focused on food. They were irritable. They were anxious. All these types of things that you think, that's how I act when I'm hungry too. And a lot of anxiety and obsessive thinking was observed. And then sadly, but not surprisingly, a lot of them reported a distorted self-image. They had significant weight loss and a skeletal appearance, but a lot of the men didn't even see themselves as underweight. They actually viewed and started to compare themselves as fat to the other men. And they also became very preoccupied with their abdominal area. Some of them had bloating, constipation, gas. So again, a really distorted self-image started to quickly develop. So after the 6 months, they were on this restricted diet for about 6 months. They were able to get off of it after they had lost approximately 25% of their body weight. That was kind of the key. And the men, those who tolerated it to the end, there were quite a few that dropped out. They were then observed through what they call the refeeding process. So now that they're able to eat more normally, so there was a restoration or refeeding phase of the experiment. And Keys found that the men had extraordinary calorie needs, over 4,000 calories per day, to help them restore slowly their weight. And a subset of the men were allowed to refeed without a controlled protocol, and they exhibited extreme overeating. So a few key takeaways, beyond what I already mentioned, we understand that, from this study that the restriction of nutrition leads to a really heightened interest and focus on food. And so when you're restricting, you may feel really overwhelmingly preoccupied with food. And then also overeating is also often a result of undereating. So if you've ever felt like, oh my gosh, I restricted, I was doing so well, and then you allow yourself to eat and you end up eating more, it's generally because you were undereating before, and it's your body's natural reaction to being restricted. And other things we've talked about before is that, prolonged restriction is going to negatively affect your mood, increase anxiety, obsessive thinking. The one big key takeaway that I love is that inability to stick to strict diets is not because of a lack of willpower. There is a biological pull to maintain a consistent body weight. So moving back to the idea of making peace with food. So when we tell ourselves that we can't eat a particular food, or we try to restrict the amount significantly or control it, we get stuck in a cycle. So at the top is the restriction, and then we come down and it causes intense feelings of deprivation. And then those build into uncontrollable cravings. And then we move to the next part of the cycle, which is going to be binging. Now, when I say binging, I also want to make it a little bit broader than that. I usually refer to it as just eating past the level of feeling comfortably full. Sometimes there's a connotation or an idea that binging is always binging and purging, like a full-blown eating disorder. This is just eating to the point where you're not really paying attention to your hunger and fullness cues. You're just eating. So when you finally give in to that forbidden food and you're in that binge area, you're going to be eating with such intent, the feelings you experience will be so intense that often results in what we call Last Supper overeating, and you have overwhelming guilt. And then what happens when you're in a cycle? Of course, it's a circle. So it perpetuates the cycle. And I'm sure you see this happen in your life. When I first read this, I was like, oh, wow, I can see it. I did it here and I did it here throughout my life. The hard part about this is then, as you're in this cycle leads you to believe that, oh, you're right, I can't be trusted with this food. Look what I just did. I overate when I was trying to restrict it, and now I can't be trusted. So let me tighten it a little bit further. And then it continues. And if you think I can't trust myself, but really that couldn't be further from the truth. You're not the problem. It's the actual restriction that is the problem. So, and the sad thing is when you're eating that food that you were craving, you're in that cycle, you're not even really enjoying it, because honestly, you're usually planning your next impending diet thinking this is the last time I'll have to eat it. Your mind already is fixating on the fact that this food is going to be absent for the next period. So you're just getting your fill before the deprivation starts again. So for many women, myself included at the time, this deprivation, the crave, the binge, that shame that goes with it, it goes on for years. Now, it might look different. You might think, I don't do that, but it might just be a cheat day. Maybe you're just saying, I'm not going to eat sugar or eat a specific food for this, 6 days. And on the 7th day, I'm going to cheat. Maybe you just go for extended periods of time. I'm going to be in this diet, and then I'll have this period where I allow myself to eat it. But it's all the same cycle. It might just look a little bit different for you in your specific situation if you're doing this. So when you're trying to make peace with food, the goal is to have unconditional permission to eat that food that you restrict, and to remove the good or bad labels around the food. So when you do that, you actually remove the urgency and the excitement. You really get to taste the food, see how it feels in your body, and then you learn to trust that that food will always be available at any other time that you might want it. And that allows you, going back to principle 2, to honor your hunger and fullness cues again. So if you, like so many women, might not be aware that you're doing it, because food rules and deprivation are often so praised in our society, it's hard to really make sense of this. And the shame that follows a binge or overeating isn't really something that we tend to talk about with others. So it might be a habit, like I said, that you might be unaware of until you sit down and look at your eating habits and your eating cycle. I'm hoping that some of you are having an aha moment as you realize, wow, I've done this to some level or to some extent in my life. So the beauty of intuitive eating as a whole is that the goal is that you eventually reestablish trust with your body, that all foods really can become neutral. An apple is morally equivalent to a piece of chocolate cake, because you know that you can freely have one or the other whenever you want. That might seem like an outlandish thing to say. And now I said morally equivalent. I did not say nutritionally equivalent. I'm not going to be here to tell you that an apple is the same as a chocolate cake. They both have different things in them. But your body is smart. Once you let your body actually talk to you, you will be able to hear and know when your body is craving an apple versus wanting some chocolate cake, that there is a difference, and you will learn to recognize those cues. I promise. It might sound crazy, but once you allow yourself to trust your body, it will get to that point. So I want to put this into practice with hopefully some ideas. I know I made it sound like a simple process, but as with anything in life and with intuitive eating, like I said, take it slow. It's nuanced. So we talked about last week, it can feel scary and overwhelming to not have a program or the guardrails that you've had in the past. Maybe you're MyFitnessPal telling you how many calories or macros that you have left. But again, the end goal is to trust your body's cues again, not the app or the amount of calories on your program that you're allowed to have. So trust requires some faith and some experimentation and honestly time. At first, you might feel like you're so excited to eat that food. It's finally not forbidden. And that might be the first few times. And it'll feel scary, like, I can't let myself do this. But it will even out. The urgency and the excitement, like I mentioned, it starts out super intense, but it will start to normalize and start to become emotionally neutral. That food will be something that you enjoy, but it won't be as intense anymore, which is the goal. Food is food. Food is neutral. And then you are neutral just because you ate food, the neutral food. So let's get started. So you need to do some thinking, have a piece of paper out. This shouldn't take too long, but I want you to inventory what foods you currently forbid or restrict in your day-to-day diet. This could be even food categories like carbs or ingredients like sugar or flour, for example, or it could be like soda or a specific food. Maybe it's chips, whatever it is, it's going to be very individual to you. And you can rank them if you want in levels of scariest to least scary. This will help you decide, okay, do I want to try a scary food or the least scary? I would recommend picking one or two foods. Personally, I would try one that maybe isn't the scariest, but one that is scary enough that you will feel the difference as it becomes emotionally neutral for you. So maybe somewhere in the middle, something not too overwhelming, because I want you to build confidence in this process. And because as you build confidence, you build motivation to continue on to the next one and to keep doing this until it becomes a natural process for you. It's best if you could do this in a calm environment. I know that can be hard. I'm personally not in the calmest of environments with 4 children who are still remote schooling at home. But if you can just find 10 minutes to try this out where it's mostly quiet in your house, it'll be to your advantage. But maybe it's after people aren't around. If you can find a few quiet moments. The best is also to try it maybe a couple hours after a meal, so you're not really full, but you also don't have that primal or physical hunger driving your experience. Like, I am so hungry. You just want to be kind of in a neutral place so that you can really pay attention to those cues. So before you begin eating, you need to remind yourself that this is a journey of discovery. It's not pass or fail. So come from the perspective of being curious and having non-judgmental awareness. You're going to notice bite by bite. How does this food taste? Am I enjoying it? And you're going to slow down as well. Oftentimes, some of these foods that we eat because we're feeling emotional or uncomfortable, we end up eating them without a lot of awareness. So this is going to have you slow down and put a level of awareness to it. Are you enjoying it? Is it meeting your expectations? Does anything surprise you about how it actually tastes when you take that time to slow down? Now, I would also encourage you to note any feelings of anxiety or shame or guilt or joy about finally being able to eat this food that you love. And writing that down is really going to help as you do this with other foods and you want to remember what was the experience for you. And also as you continue on this process with this specific food, because you want to repeat this process until it can become emotionally neutral. Like I said, if it's one of your really high scary foods, it might take a while for that food to really become neutral and not be something that you're really feeling a lot of excitement or urgency over when you eat. I will say that personally, I've done this for many foods. I think it was a few years ago, the first time I really tried this. And there's a couple different foods that I could share. For me, one of them was just Diet Pepsi. Being someone who was trying to be very healthy, got to focus on the foods, got to be a really good example. I was taking soda out of my diet. And so soda became this restricted thing. I'm not saying soda is some sort of magical thing, but for I think over a year, I wasn't drinking any soda and I was really proud of it. But it also became this thing that I kind of when I did allow myself to have it, I definitely would go big gulp style, really big, going to the Circle K and getting the biggest one. And so I started buying it and keeping it in my house. And I remember my parents coming to visit going, wait a minute, you have soda again in your house. Like, why do you have that? And so I talked to them about this process that I was going through. I'm like, I'm letting myself have it in the house. And you know what? We still have it in the house and I will still buy it. But I went through the process of when I wanted it, I would have it. And when I realized that it was always there, I needed a lower amount. I paid more attention to how it felt in my body. And I still sometimes do drink soda. I probably have like 1 or 2 a week at the most. And it's usually a small amount. And honestly, it takes me several hours to drink it. It really just depends. And it doesn't have that power over me anymore. I don't feel like, oh, soda, it is the savior to my emotional experiences anymore. It's just a drink that I like with Mexican food or specific food, pizza generally. So I also did this with like certain types of dark chocolate or sea salt caramel is a big one for me. When there's one specific caramel that I had that when I allowed myself to eat it and eat it slowly, I noticed, I really only like 2 of them. When I have more of them at a slower rate of eating, I didn't like it as much. The taste of it wasn't as good. The caramel kind of tasted funny to me. So that's some things you might notice, that a certain food only tastes good to you if you eat it fast, which is a sign that maybe you don't like it as much. It's just an emotional thing or something you've restricted for a long time in the past. So those are my personal experiences. You will have your own experiences, your own foods as you do this process. But you know, honestly, people, when they give themselves permission to eat foods, a lot of times they do eat those foods. They can be considered unhealthy or forbidden. And like I said, sometimes it's on a cheat day or, you know, a day that they're allowing themselves to violate their food rules. And it might be a more of an emotional thing. So again, you're taking that emotional part out of it and just allowing yourself to listen to your body's cues. So there are other reasons why you might go through forced deprivation, whether it's food insecurity or really strict food rules in your family. And these things tend to also backfire. You know, if you think about kids, when your kids are very restricted in a certain type of food at their home, what do they do when they go to their friends' houses? They go crazy usually. That is something I personally had to work on with me, with my kids. Okay, no sugar cereal, no. And I really, as I went through this process, I had to relax. So we have sugar cereal in our house. And it's been fascinating to watch my kids themselves relax around the sugar cereal. Yes, they still like it. They get excited, but it's not like they're clamoring and hiding and wanting to eat it all the time. It's become kind of a more of an emotionally neutral thing for them. So it's fun to be able to experiment on your kids. You don't have to just experiment on yourself. So just the last thing I wanted to wrap up with is, you know, I get a lot of questions about making peace with food and having unconditional permission to eat food. Is it really that simple? So practically speaking, yes. But I understand, like I said, there are fears and challenges that come along with this process. So intellectually, it's simple. Emotionally, probably not. It can take time and require support. And it's something that when I coach clients, it's something we talk about. And when a food comes up that there seems to be a lot of energy around, we'll talk about, you know, is this something that you're allowing yourself to eat? Is this something you need to make peace with? How long will it take to work through a food? Again, that's highly personal, depending on how long you've been restricting this, how much energy, how much emotion is there around this food. It can take a while. But trying to speed it up and keep doing it super fast isn't going to make it, it's going to be futile. So long road, it is what it is. And it is a process that will reward you if you take the time that it needs. The last one is kind of funny. Is just, you know, can I skip this step and still learn to be an intuitive eater? There are a lot of people that are like, well, I want to be an intuitive eater, but I just am not going to let myself eat these particular foods. Basically, no. I can understand that this stuff is challenging and people don't want to do it because of the world we live in. There's just so many conflicting messages about diets, and a lot of people just want to, well, I know if I don't eat these foods, I'll stay at this particular weight that I want. But honestly, I liken it to jumping into the middle of an ocean without a life jacket. But without making peace with all foods, it's really impossible for you to break the deprivation binge cycle. So if that's a cycle that you're in right now with anything, you really do need to focus on making peace with that food. But I promise, as you use these steps, as you work through them, you can systematically work through your fear foods, and you can do this with a lot of different things and find success. So That is what I have for you today. And I'd love if you have any questions, so please feel free to reach out and to do these things yourselves. I will include a link again for a worksheet that it'll be out on my Linktree website, that it'll allow you to go through this process for some of your fear foods or foods that you have a lot of energy around. And it's one that I give out to clients so they can work through specific foods, and it's really helpful that way. So again, let me know if you have any questions, and I'm excited to talk to you next week with Principle 4.